How about them dogs? Let's go. Oh, yeah. What you think about that? Yeah, Roll Tide. Yeah, well, keep playing the cupcakes, you'll keep rolling. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm here. I want you to hear from your pastor that for sure Kirby Smart lied last night. There's no doubt in my mind. If you have no idea what I was talking about, he was calling for a timeout. He wasn't saying snap the ball. It was this. Go back and watch the replay. It is what it is. Not asking him to lead our church, just our football team, okay? No, let's jump in. The last, 9 weeks, we've been journeying, following a guy named Paul. We were introduced to him in a time that we have coined here at our church as the making of Paul. And we were introduced to him as this zealous, just enormously passionate for his faith Jewish leader that has taken upon himself the weight of the entire Jewish world to make sure that Judaism is protected, to make sure that everything that surrounds Judaism doesn't infiltrate it and kind of pollute it. And so he's kind of identified that the way of Jesus, the disciples, Jesus himself, like Christianity, as a threat. And so he begins to put out that threat like he's putting out a fire. He arrests people. He oversees their executions. Like he gets into that whole mess where it's not just Jerusalem, like this epicenter of the Jewish life. He goes beyond it into other cities. And that's where we're introduced to Paul. We follow him through this incredible transformation where God begins to make him into a new creation. He begins to transform his life. And for 4 weeks, we followed the making of Paul. And we followed that up with then the next piece, which was, instead of just make me, God, would you use me? And so we then started following Paul through his surrender to say, hey, I don't want to just be a follower of Jesus. I don't want to just be forgiven. I don't want to simply be a recipient of grace. I also want to be used by the grace giver. I also want to be used by the person who does the forgiving. I actually would love to take God up on his own invitation to partner with him in sharing this with other people. And so we go from persecutor to preacher, and then from preacher to church planter. And so Paul begins to travel. He starts in his home base in a place called Antioch in Syria. And he starts there and he goes to the island of Cyprus, which is an island it's one of his closest friends named Barnabas, kind of his home. They go there, and from Barnabas's home, they set out on this missionary journey number 1. And they go into what we know today as modern day Turkey. And they visit 4 different cities and plant churches there. After he's gone to all 4, every single one of them has trouble. Every one of them get upset and furious with him. And one, they almost kill him. They stone him. They think he's dead. It's wild how we walked Paul through this use me idea. On his way back, he decides, okay, I've done my job here in modern day Turkey. On his way back, he revisits the city, appoints elders in those cities, appoints leadership in those cities, encourages them, and then comes back home to the home base in Antioch in Syria. Once he's gotten there, something weird happens. Once he's home, he's sharing with the church at Antioch how things went. He's telling them all about these churches that he planted. They're excited because if you weren't here in the beginning, let me refresh you. Antioch is the first church plant that happens outside of Jerusalem. And so it's full of people that are not Jewish. In fact, the overwhelming majority of this church is not Jewish. So they are straight converts from, I worshiped Apollo, I worshiped Aphrodite, Hermes, the whole thing, Greek gods. They transition from that to, we believe in Jesus Christ, died on the cross, resurrected from the dead. That is the church that's planted there. And so when Paul begins to tell the story of all the things that he and Barnabas did as they planted churches all throughout modern day Turkey, he's telling them stories that are similar to theirs because there's not enormous Jewish communities that are the central piece of these church plants. Paul wanted them to, invited them to, Jews rejected them. But there is this story of these churches being planted of people who are worshiping these Greek gods who convert to Christianity. And so Paul's telling them about these little baby sister, little baby brother churches that Antioch was a part, because they're the ones that sent Paul. They sent Paul and Barnabas. So they're celebrating. But then that weird thing happens. People start showing up in Antioch that were trading, that were visiting or passing through that region of modern day Turkey. And they're telling Paul, because undoubtedly, you go to a place and then someone after you goes to it and you're like, hey, did you go to this place? And what was that like? And oh, it was cool when I was there. I remember when I saw this. Those kind of conversations are happening. And so Paul's checking in on the baby churches that he just planted. He's checking in, they're having the conversations, and he's hearing the strangest things. So much so that he kind of panics a bit because things aren't going well. Like he just left them. He just appointed leaders. And things are not going well. The stories that are coming from that particular area of the world where those churches are at, they're not good stories. And so Paul decides to write a letter that would be taken to all of those plants, that would be read and circulated in all of those churches. It's a letter that we still read to this day. It has been a gift to Christianity as a whole. You find it in the second section of your Bible, the New Testament. It's called the letter to the Galatians. Modern day Turkey was present, or then past, at that time, present day Galatia. So when Paul writes this letter, he doesn't start with, I miss you, hope you're doing well, salutations. None of those things. When Paul writes this letter, he's fired up. We've got 3 problems Paul's going to address. And I'm going to try to walk through them as quickly as I can. It didn't go well for the 9, so strap in. Galatians chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, an apostle sent not from men, nor by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead. That's an interesting way to start a letter to churches that you gave birth to, right? He's starting off with, let me remind you who I am. Paul, third person, that's right. I'm Paul, an apostle, sent not from men nor by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead. In other words, I'm setting a stage. Let me remind you, the reason I showed up in your city is not because someone thought it was a good idea and sent me, not because someone said, hey, let's strategically think through the cities in Galatia. No, it's because God and Jesus put it in me to come and share with you what I shared with you. Now, we don't know it yet because we're just at verse 1, but there are some people that are questioning whether Paul had the authority to do what he did by starting the churches in Galatia. Paul's addressing it head on. It's not, hey, hope you're doing well. It's out of the gates. They undo the letter, and they're like, oh, it's from Paul, because they looked at his name at the bottom. They're like, let's see what he said. Oh, we're in trouble. Then in verse 11, he doubles down. He says, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. So he just doubles down on, I just want to remind you, nobody sent me. God sent me. Jesus sent me. And the message that I shared with you, the establishment of the church, the whole idea of Jesus, nobody taught that to me. Nobody shared it with me in a Bible study. Jesus himself spoke it to me, and I simply restated it to you. Here's the problem he was addressing. Problem number 1. There were some new voices that had showed up in those churches. And they started casting doubt on what Paul had said to them in terms of their ability to have a relationship with God and what that looked like. They were saying things like, hey, don't you know that Paul actually didn't walk with Jesus like the original disciples, right? The original apostles. Like, you know, when we say that, we're saying like Peter, Andrew, James, John, Thomas, Matthew, Philip, Bartholomew, James, Jude, Simon, Judas. You hear those names, it's like, okay, those are OG guys. Paul wasn't a part of that group. Paul didn't sit with Jesus for 3 years and follow him around in and out Jerusalem. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. So how does Paul know all this about Jesus? Or they're saying things like, hey, you know that Paul's just preaching a watered down message to y'all. Like, because you're Gentiles, is what he's saying. The people that showed up, they were Jewish. And so they're like, you know, the OG apostles, they're all Jewish, right? You know, Jesus, newsflash, he was a Jew. You know, Paul, also a Jew. And so when he told you how to have a relationship with Jesus through God, he knew y'all weren't Jewish, so he kind of like dumbed it down for you. Or maybe it was just a game of telephone, you know, where you start with one thing, and by the time you whisper it in so many people's ears, it comes out something else. That Jesus told Peter, and maybe Peter spent some time with Paul, and then Paul talked with Barnabas, and then talked with the Antioch church, and then relearned it, and then was sent out. Like maybe that's what happened. And Paul's response in the very first chapter, the opening line, is no. People, this isn't my message. This isn't man's message. It's Jesus' message. That was problem one that Paul was addressing. Problem two, a little more difficult to address. We find it in verse 6. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ. There's that word grace. And are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Man, Paul has completely skipped the small talk. This is verse 6. This is verse 6. Remember, verse 1 was Paul speaking in third person. Nobody sent me. Nobody gave me this message. No one taught it from me. Jesus himself gave it to me. We skipped 3, 4 verses down, and it's like, oh, by the way, I'm astonished. You are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which then he goes so far to say, which is actually not a gospel at all. Gospel means good news, right? So he's saying, look, I can't believe that you're actually following a different good news, which the truth is, it's not actually good news. If we look at it, it's not the good news at all. You can call it a gospel, you can call it this collection of knowledge and details, but it ain't what it is. Paul's not writing as a theologian. He's writing as like, like a dad. Think through this, right? Let's say dad's front yard, right? In the front yard, I don't know, kids doing what kids do. They're playing. There's a ball. The ball goes in the street. There's a car coming. Kid doesn't realize cars can go on this road. This street seems perfectly fine for me to run out in. And the dad's got to make a decision. Okay, I know my gentle parenting training has told me to redirect him. Please, sir, come over this way, right? But that ain't gonna work, is it? No, it isn't. So the dad, because he loves him, reaches out and snatches whatever he can hold on to and rips him back, right? Because we'll deal with the pulled hair or I ripped your shirt or whatever it is. I'm not letting you run out into traffic. That's dumb. That's what Paul's doing. Paul said, look, I don't have time to gentle parent you people because what you are flirting with is disaster. It's a gospel, called a gospel, but it's actually not the gospel at all. It's nothing like it. It's nothing like it. Verse 7, evidently some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Oh, the language doesn't get any more strong here. I don't know when Paul wrote this, if he was thinking 2,000 years from now, churches are going to read this and they're going to be so encouraged. I don't know if when he wrote this letter, he was thinking about, I'm writing part of the Bible. I think he was writing, wake up, kids. Wake up. That word confused, or thrown in verse 7, where it says people are throwing you into confusion. When we look at the original language, confusion loses a little bit of the teeth that comes with it. Confusion is a little light when you go to pick up that word. It really, the real core of it is, it's a word that means to agitate, to disturb, to unsettle, to cause inward turmoil for someone. So it's not just like, I don't know what to do. It's not like there's a preference of how to do church. Like, well, our church doesn't like to use drums, so we're just gonna do piano and organ, and then your church can do drums. It's not that kind of choice. No, the whole reason you would gather as a church to begin with, regardless of whether you have drums or not. Like, this is important. This is the identity of who you are. It's not even the identity of who you are, it's the identity of who Jesus is. And truth is, immaturity gets confused easily. And that's not a dig, that's just the reality of young churches. I mean, they were so young. I mean, he had just planted them. He appointed some leaders, but they were just so immature. And that's just the reality talk. They were just so immature. It takes so long to process the reality of Jesus. You've got to stay with it. You don't just snap your fingers and become like Jesus overnight. It takes time. And when you're dealing with people who are just honestly immature in their faith because they're so new to it, it's so easy to manipulate them. It's so easy. It's one of the reasons we launched our AI tool last week, because so many people are new to faith. And when you have questions, it's like AI is this new thing. What do you think Google is? You get on Google and you ask the question you want to ask. And then there's no telling who's going to answer that question for you. And the immaturity of so many people who are brand new to faith, again, not a bad thing from immaturity, just the reality of, hey, I'm a baby Christian. You're just Googling questions that are so important. They're so important for you to get a good answer for. So you can Google it, or you can jump on any version of ChatGPT, and you can Google it or chat your answer, but there's no telling if it's right, or if whoever answers you actually read the Bible. So yeah, that's why we launched it, is we can actually put the Bible in it. We can answer the questions ahead of time. So then it gives people an opportunity to say, hey, instead of Googling this, why don't I just see what we believe? Why don't I take a look at what the Bible says instead of what some rando on Google said about what the Bible says? But if you're immature, it's so easy to manipulate them. As long as you use big words and you talk from authority and you sound half decently smart, like people are like, oh, he must know what he's talking about. Paul triples down on this. We haven't even gotten to what the root cause is. We're just kind of like punching down, about to get to the core, which it'll make sense once we get there. He gets even worse in verse 8. He says, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. I love that Paul includes himself in this. He says we, right? He says, I don't care if we'll get to the angel in a second. I don't care if we show up. He's talking about him and Barnabas. If we show up and we tell you a different gospel than the gospel we shared with you when we planted your church, do not listen to us. Do not listen to us. That's what he's saying. It can't get any better. It can't get more perfect. It can't get more pure. There's nothing to add to it. The gospel we shared with you was directly from Jesus. There's nothing else to say. So even if I show up in a decade and say, hey, let me show you something else cool that I found, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Don't listen to us even. And then he takes it a step further. He's like, if an angel from heaven shows up and tries to tell you anything differently than what I shared with you directly from Jesus, don't believe him. Don't believe him. That's heavy. That's legit though. Paul uses this curse language because the stakes are that high. The truth is, anything that adds to the gospel doesn't improve it. It replaces it. Because the gospel, the good news that Paul shared with the Galatian church, it was complete. So you can't add to it. You can't wordsmith it to make it more clear. It is what it is. And when he shared it with the church at Galatia, all the churches in Galatia, that was it. He gave them the purest form of it. So there's nothing to improve on. There's nothing to take a further step and say, hey, you know what? Let's get some more. It doesn't exist. But there are people that are telling him in those church plants, he left some things out. And Paul's saying, no, I did not. If I left some things out, Jesus left some things out because I got what I shared with you from him. Now, this is not new. This is not even, like for us, it didn't even stop 2,000 years ago with the Galatian churches. This happens still today. Let's go back from an institutional standpoint. Let's go back 500 years to the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic Church had added to the gospel. What did they say? Well, indulgences. If you pay X amount, or you give, or you say this number of prayers, this will make you right with God. And Martin Luther and a crew stepped in and was like, hey, this isn't in the Bible. Who thought of this? Like, well, we got to fund the cathedral somehow. You know what I'm saying? All right? And so it stopped. Now, the Catholic Church has done a great job at completely disowning that whole idea of penance in terms of indulgences, right? It's not the Catholic Church it was enormously corrupt, right? But it's not just the Catholic Church from 500 years ago. What do you think the Book of Mormon is? It's adding to what was already complete. And I love that Paul tells us in advance, if an angel from heaven shows up, don't believe him. How did Mormonism start? Angels buried some plates outside of New York. The completion of the God. No, he didn't. It didn't. You add anything. I'm so frustrated with it because I see the church still doing it today. You add anything to the gospel, you didn't improve it, you didn't clarify it, you replace it. There is no in between. There is no gray area. It's either what Jesus said or it isn't what Jesus said. And if it ain't what Jesus said, it's wrong. It might be 99% right, but the thing is, Jesus gives us perfection. So anything that's not perfection is wrong. Paul's just trying to say, as loudly as he can through pen and paper, there is no other gospel. There isn't one. So let me ask you, church, what is the gospel then? What is it that he is so worked up about? What is it that he's so fired up about? What is this gospel? And I know there's a possibility, there's a potential then maybe you're sitting here, especially those of you who have been church people for a long time, and you're like, oh, great, we're going to talk for an hour and a half about grace. Okay, great. I know a lot about grace. We've been talking about grace before. Let me ask you, people, what's the gospel then? Like if somebody came up to you this week, and let's just pretend for a second, I don't know, you were wearing one of the thousands of shirts that Foundation's giving you. And they're like, hey, so what is this you belong here or here to serve or established in 20? Like what is that triangle thing? Is that like Harry Potter but different? You know, like what is this thing? I see this is half your wardrobe. Like what is this? And you were saying, oh, it's the church I go to. And they were like, oh man, we don't do church. You like church? I'm like, yeah, like why is church important to you? You got an option there, right? You could say something like, oh, well, we got a smoke machine and drums. This is really cool. Wrong answer, right? No. Well, the answer is you got 30 seconds to share the gospel. Could you do it? I'm not talking about, hey, could you sit down and have coffee with them and eventually over 30 minutes you could fumble out the truth about Jesus? I'm not asking you that. I'm asking if a friend were to give you a 30-second window with a genuine question open to your answer, they ain't listening for 30 minutes of you preaching, I promise. Y'all don't even listen to me, right? I'm supposed to do it for a living. There's no way that you got 30 seconds. Could you do it? You might be saying, oh, Clint, I don't talk to strangers, okay? That's my mama taught me. I barely talk to my family, and it's only through group message. You know what I'm saying? Let me give you something simple to remember it. Just something simple. 4 words. Creation, sin, solution, me. Creation, sin, solution, me. Yeah, we didn't put it on the screen on purpose. I want you to remember it, which means that you're either going to be okay forgetting it, or you're going to have to write it down, type it down, or take a picture. So you have to do something more than just stare at it. Creation, sin, solution, me. God loved us and created us. Sin entered the world and separated us from God. God had a decision to make. That separation, do I just back off, wipe my hands with them, or do I get close to them and figure it out? He drew close. His solution was Jesus. Died on the cross, resurrected from the dead, and it has changed my life. That's the gospel. That's it. That's it. Creation, sin, solution, me. A lot of us want to stop at the solution part. Creation, sin, solution. God loved us, he created us. Sin entered the world, separated us. God had a decision to make. He drew near instead of drawing away. And in doing that, he created the solution. He sent his only son. Jesus died on the cross, resurrected from the dead for our sins. And we want to stop there. The power in the gospel is not in a story. The power of the gospel is in your life. And so you got to finish with the me part. What does that mean to you? Well, I wear a t-shirt. No, that's not good enough. That isn't good enough. They actually want to know. They're asking, what is your answer? What difference does it make that you actually know the authentic, pure gospel? Paul continues, verse 10. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. He says, look, these people that showed up, you don't have to worry about making them happy with your religious movement. These people that showed up from Jerusalem or wherever they came from that's put you into this confusion, this inner turmoil, this inner agitation, you don't have to worry about what they think. If they're telling you something different, you don't have to worry about what they think. Why are we people pleasing? Your main objective ought to be, I want to please God, which in turn is going to do one of two things. The people who also want to please God will be pleased with you. And all the haters who are pretenders on Sundays, they won't be pleased with you, but you couldn't have pleased them anyway. He says, look, we're not in a people-pleasing business. We're in the God-pleasing business. And when we do that, the people who need to be pleased will be pleased because they're also in the God-pleasing business. So we're not people-pleasing. He says, he goes so far to say, if I wanted to please people, I wouldn't follow Jesus. Now that's big. The truth is, people and Jesus typically have different agendas for our life. I can't tell you how many kids, when I was doing student ministry, would come and tell me, I think I want to do ministry. And their parents would tell them, no, that career sucks because you don't get paid anything. I can't tell you how many kids wanted to try and do Bible college, but their parents were like, no. This is no good for you. You want to serve in the church, but golly, don't submit yourself to that. That's problem 2. Problem 3, influencers. Not just people that came and created confusion. When I say influencers, I mean like in our world, like celebrity, like everybody knows who they are, they're influencers. The biggest influencer, probably himself in the first century, was a guy by the name of Peter. Yes, that Peter. Walked on water Peter, that's the guy. Denied Jesus 3 times, was reinstated, that's the guy. The really close friend of Jesus, that's the Peter I'm talking about. So while this is all happening, Peter decides to visit from Jerusalem the Antioch church. Remember, Antioch is the home base of Paul and Barnabas where they were sent from to the missionary journey. So Peter comes down from Jerusalem to visit the Antioch church. He loves it. He's like, this is incredible. This is incredible. Like all these people who were not Jewish just left their false gods and are following Jesus. This is incredible. Peter is like, and he's a celebrity, right? I mean, like when Peter walks in a room, you're like, oh, that's Peter. Like the Peter we've heard, like that's Peter. Yeah, that's Peter. And he's eating dinner with them, he's like pouring into them. He's investing in people. He's teaching. He's living among them. He's just experiencing the Antioch church for all of its goodness. Everything is going so good. So good. Well, then this happens. Now, I will tell you, Paul is about to call Peter by his government name, which is Cephas. So we'll put that out there. Verse 11, chapter 2. When Cephas came to Antioch, Cephas, again, Peter. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, pause. I know we're introducing a lot of people. Like I think Peter's probably decently easy for most people. James is a little different. James is the little brother of Jesus. James is not the disciple James that spent a lot of time with Jesus. In fact, at this time, he's most likely dead. He was executed. So this is James, little brother of Jesus. Little brother of Jesus goes on to lead the Jerusalem church. He becomes a big deal. And this time, he's also a big deal. And so that's why he's not coming himself. He's sending other people. He's like, hey, go down there. So that's what James does. It makes sense. Jesus is gone. And so a family member of Jesus would have a little bit of pull. That's where James is. So James, again, leading the Jerusalem church, sends some people down. Cephas is already in Antioch, hanging out with everybody. James sends some people down. Let's go back to verse 12. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with Gentiles, talking about Peter. So before the people came from James, Peter was eating with Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. Now, that's a great group to be a part of, by the way. That's just great. I don't know if they got t-shirts or like members-only jackets, but for sure, in the first century, the circumcision was synonymous with the Jewish people, right? So when he says this, he's referencing Jews in Jerusalem. That's the idea. So that idea, even in anywhere where there was Jewish people, they could also be known as the circumcised group. That's where we are. So he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. So Peter is in Antioch. He's like doing life with these new Christians, eating with them, pouring into them. James sends some people down to check out how things are going. When they get there, Peter withdraws from eating with Gentiles. And the reason he withdraws is because it's against Jewish law. It makes you unclean, right? Like that whole idea. For the entirety of the history of the Jewish people, there was this huge separation of Jews and Gentiles. And Gentiles were pagan. Gentiles were without Yahweh, without Jehovah. Everything they did was unclean. And so they separated themselves. The Jews were a holy people. They were set apart. And so they didn't do anything intermixing, especially eating. Like, I'm not talking about ceremonially eating. I mean like grabbing a sandwich at a diner eating. Like no eating with Gentiles. So these guys show up. Peter withdraws. Now when Peter does this, because he's an influencer, everybody's like, why is Peter doing that? Like when Peter stops coming to dinner, everybody's like, where's Peter? And they're like, oh, I didn't see him at lunch or breakfast. Or actually, I haven't seen him eat with any of us Have any of you eaten with Peter? No? This is weird. But Peter's eating a bunch with all the Jewish folks. But he's not eating with any of the non-Jewish Christians. Why is that? Paul confronts him about it. He's like, bro, both of these things can't be true. Either you were sinning by eating with the Gentiles before they showed up, or you're sinning now because you're denying them like first-class citizenship, you know what I'm saying, in the kingdom. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't one of those things where Peter was like, I dismiss the grace given to the Gentiles. Like, I still think we'll be in heaven together. I just don't want to like eat lunch with them. That's what Peter was saying. And Paul's like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? The grace of God can give us eternal life with the Father, but he can't make it to where we can eat lunch together? Are you serious? What Peter had started to do with the help of the guys sent from James was create first-class Christians and then lower-class Christians. You are a real first-class Christian if you were a Jew first and then started following Jesus. But if you didn't get the Jew part, well, I mean, you're still a Christian, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, not really. I mean, like, you're here, but I mean, please don't sit with me as I enjoy my croissant. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're dirty. Paul confronts him publicly. What's interesting is that we get to watch Paul mature himself and how he handles situations. Paul doesn't try and cancel Barnabas. Barnabas is actually going to be a part of missions in the future. Paul doesn't try and cancel Peter either. He simply has an open discussion in public with them because he knows that this discussion influences not just who they eat with for dinner, but it influences the kingdom as a whole. Where have you pulled away from the table? Have we been guilty of creating second-class or lower-class Christians? Maybe in dress expectations on a Sunday morning? Like, we're pretty casual, but I mean, let's be honest, even we still have some type of standard of cleanliness, right? Or maybe it's a spiritual resume bias, where we value the length of time you've attended Foundation. There's some of you who have been here for 8.5 years since the very beginning. Do Do we see brand new people with the same value we see ourselves, even though we started it together? Or maybe it's a married versus single mindset where we see the family unit and the children, and we elevate that status in a church. And we just kind of think, oh, well, single folks, they'll get there someday. They're still learning. Maybe it's worship engagement, where we assume someone's faith is weak because they don't raise their hands or sing passionately when our band leads. Maybe it's Bible knowledge pride, where we make people feel small in our small groups because they don't know the stories or the reason behind a certain beliefs. Maybe it's volunteer hierarchy, where we elevate people who are seen on stage or in public spaces and neglect those who are working their tails off behind the scene. Maybe it's giving-based worth, where people who write larger checks are catered to, instead of people who are still trying to figure out, can I trust the church to give anything? Or maybe it's levels of sin, where we show a little more grace to respectable sins. But there are some sins we would just separate in terms of our fellowship with them. And Paul has a solution to all three of the problems we've talked about this morning. And this is what he says in chapter 2, verse 19. For through the law, I died to the law so that I might live for God. And Paul's saying, look, I used to live under the law. I used to live under the law. I built my entire identity on the law. If you're new to Bible study, he's talking about the Mosaic law, the law that creates life expectations for the people and nation of Israel. And that law dictated everything in their life. And so he says, hey, I adhere to that thing 100%. Like I was all in. My entire existence revolved around that idea of the law. So I through the law is actually how I died. Like I died to it so that I could live for God. You see, the thing is that Paul realized in living for the law that the law was unable to actually be satisfied. You see, this is the most important thing that Paul realizes that he's trying to lead the Jewish people through, and hopefully still us today, is that the law was so good for its purpose. The law existed to establish a nation, but ultimately the law was a gift so that people would explore it and try to chase it down. And ultimately the law would be the lesson giver that would say, you actually can't satisfy me. You're not enough. Try as hard as you can. You can't reach the level of perfection I require. The law was a gift to show us how much we needed Jesus, how much we needed grace. And so Paul says, in trying to satisfy it, I died to myself so that I could live for God. It taught me I'm not enough. I'm not enough. If you've ever thought, I'll never be good enough for God, you're actually closer to grace than the person thinking they already are good enough for God. That's the truth. He continues in verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. This is such an incredible picture of faith. He just comes out and says it. This is the me part, right? Creation, sin, solution, me. He says, I've been crucified with Christ. I don't even live anymore, but Christ lives in me. He made me. He's using me. He's maturing me. And that process up until now has been about 15 years. 15 years. And Paul is saying, look, I have walked through the idea of crucifying myself. And it doesn't look right to anybody else. In the business world, it doesn't make sense. In my social world, it doesn't make sense. In my religious practices that I was brought up in, it doesn't make sense. But again, I don't people please. I please God and him alone. And that's what happens when I jump on the cross with Jesus and say, hey, not my life anymore, your life. I really meant when I said use me to use me. And then the using him, he is starting to mature, and he writes some of the richest theological language we have that we ever read for 2,000 years. The life I live now in the body, I live by faith. I love that he ties faith with his life living, not his knowledge about God. He says, look, my life is an act of faith. It is my faith. It's not a decision I made that Jesus is the Son of God. It's a decision I made to give my life to Jesus, the Son of God. Now, this is not moralism. This isn't Paul trying to say I can earn my way into God. He tried it with the law. Moralism is the belief that being a good person, doing the right things, avoiding the wrong things is what makes you right with God or makes you valuable or makes you acceptable. This is not behavior management. This is Paul saying, once I actually understood what a gift the law was, I didn't see it as a list of restrictions. I saw it a list that informed me I would never be enough. And that is so freeing to know that I can lay down that burden of trying to add up to everything God wants me to be, and I can simply sit, or maybe to use words we sang this morning, fall into grace. And when I fall into grace, I don't just lay there. It inspires me to then live my life as a crucified with Christ follower of Jesus. It's transformation. Verse 21, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. He's saying, look, if you add anything to it other than Christ crucified, anything at all, he died for nothing. Because it's not the gospel plus one. Anything other than the gospel of Jesus is not the gospel of Jesus. A lot of times we think of a clock and we look at 12:12, both hands 12:12. And we're like, if that's perfection, evil must be the opposite. Let's go 6:6, right? If up here is perfection at 12:12, the opposite of that must be evil. No. Evil is everything other than 12:12. We take one single millisecond to the right, and it's not 12:12 on the clock, it's not Jesus. The rest of the clock would be considered evil. The only thing that's righteous is Jesus. That's it. Not Jesus plus a millisecond, just Jesus. Just both hands, 12:12. That's all we get. Any deviation from it at all is replacing Jesus. Not just clarifying or adding some extra. It's replacing him. And Paul is simply saying, look, let's be honest. The gospel doesn't say, you got this. It says he's got you. And that's the difference. You can't do anything. Anything. The question underneath the letter to the Galatians is the very same one that people are still asking today. Do I really belong? If I were to give my life to Jesus, would I actually belong with the people in this church that have been following Jesus for decades? Or would they look at me as immature, second-class Christian? Well, the answer from Jesus, because you don't need to worry about what any other Christian thinks, is yes. Because he didn't just forgive you. He wants to include you. He wants to make you. He wants to use you. And he wants to go on a journey to mature you as well. Friends, church, we got to protect grace like our life depends on it. Because it does. It does. And you might be here thinking, okay, all right. We've been talking about grace. You're over the timer, Clint. And all we've talked about is grace all day, right? Maybe you're in a place where it's like, I've been doing this for like 30, 40 years, 10 years, 15 years, and you know. And you're like, where's the meat? Where's the depth? Okay, you want to go there? Let's go there. For those of you who are so mature, tell me how you've been fighting to protect grace for people who don't know the definition of grace yet. Answer that question, and then let's talk about spiritual depth. And our church does it institutionally, but you don't get a free pass because you're a part of a crew that continues to fight for grace for people who haven't received it yet. No, I'm asking you as a person. Remember, creation, sin, solution, me. What are you doing? Not to earn the favor of God, but I'm asking you out of your own spiritual depth, what are you doing to protect grace for people that have yet to even understand the true definition of grace? That when we say, fall into grace, the best word picture they have is maybe like an angel floating on a crowd that they saw in a Charmin commercial. They have no idea what it means to bear your soul to God and to realize because you've learned, I can't do anything to please him. Every time he looks at me, he sees incomplete. He sees imperfection, and I can't do anything. And I lose sleep at night because I believe there's a God. I look at the universe, and it's fine-tuned. I look at everything around me, and I know there's got to be something bigger than just me. But I also know, I know me, and there's no way he could ever accept me. And then when they all of a sudden begin, something happens. Someone reaches out with kindness, or someone steps in their life and is direct and pulls them out of traffic, or someone does something and all of a sudden they're awakened to the reality of real, honest, pure, straight from the mouth of Jesus, grace. And then they're like, oh, this is what it feels like to fall into grace. It's not a fluffy cloud. It's a life transformation. And it's a weight that can't be lifted. It's a weight that's been taken from me, bore by someone else on my behalf. And so Paul is trying to convince Peter, who by far is more mature in faith than any of us will ever be until one of you figure out how to walk on water. And he's telling the most mature guy, bro, we got to fight for grace. We can't water this down and get all weird because we want to people please, because we don't want to eat our sub sandwiches with Gentiles. Kidding me? Grace is bigger than that. Fight for it, Peter. Fight for it. He writes the letter to the church in Galatia. It is not his last interaction with the churches in Galatia because he's got more fighting to go. How about you? Let me give you what it looks like to begin to mature in Jesus. This is what we'll close with. Mature me. I will confront without canceling. Because we have such self-assurance and self-confidence in what we believe and in whom we believe, in who we are and whose we are. It doesn't bother us for any type of nonsense to be said. Let them talk, because there is a truth. And the truth is, the more people are willing to engage in nonsense, it's more of an opportunity to share the truth. Silence doesn't share truth. But good questions, or sometimes really dumb questions, can get really great answers. And who cares if they won't listen? Does what you say simply benefit the one who asked the question or caused the issue? Or does it benefit everyone within earshot who might be listening, trying to figure out, what do I believe about grace? They could just Google it, roll the dice and figure out what knucklehead philosopher puts on their own YouTube page. Or they could hear it from a fully devoted follower of Jesus who's not afraid to just share the truth. So I don't want to cancel people. I want to engage with them. But that's maturing. I will resist people pleasing. Because we're not here to make people happy. We're here to please God. And in doing so, when we please God, the right people will be pleased because they also want to please God. And the people who have no desire to please God, they were going to be your hater regardless. It's only a matter of time if you try to please them. They're looking for something to hate on. I will defend others more than myself. We've got to do a better job inspiring our other followers of Jesus to defend grace. Finally, I'll live what I preach. Now you might be thinking, hey, I'm not a preacher, so I only got to do the first three. No, your whole life is a sermon. It's being watched and read and listened to. So live it. Live it. I love that we get to watch Paul being made, Paul being used, and Paul beginning to mature. And it's my hope that by now you begin to realize that Paul's story, we're simply walking in parallel with you. That it's actually your story. That you at some point are or will be or have been in the making. That you at some point have and are or will be being used by God for his purposes. Here's the hardest part. The gap between use me and mature me is much larger than the gap between I'm not a follower of Jesus and I want to be a follower of Jesus. If you're new to faith, you're like, no, that's a bigger gap. For me to get from where I am to I trust Jesus, that's a huge, no, I'm telling you, it is closer than you think. I can tell you that because I'm now on the other side of it. It's not as big of a journey as you think to move from I don't follow Jesus to I trust Jesus as my Lord and Savior. That gap is so much smaller than you're thinking it is. The gap from I trust Jesus to, man, Jesus, will you use me in some way? Like I want to be a part of your story. The distance from make me to use me, short. It is not a long journey to get there. It's so short. The journey from use me to mature me, most of us never get there. We just become satisfied with playing a small role in an outpost of the kingdom of God in some little church. But the idea that God would actually mature me, challenge me, cause me to stand up, confront, but not cancel, to fight for grace, to not just let it slide, but to engage, to have an answer for the hope that I have, that if I got a 30-second opportunity, I could actually share not my version of the gospel, but the pure gospel straight from Jesus, creation, sin, solution, and me. That takes time. But I promise you, whatever church figures out how to help people from the use me to mature me, man, they will change the world. That was the whole point of the gospel to begin with. It sounds like we got work to do, church. But I'm glad to be on the journey with you.